welcome back to another episode with me, George, your host of Georgeonsports. And today we have Jeff Reinebold on the show. Guys, if you don't know who Jeff is, former CFL coach with the likes of Hamilton Tiger Cats and the Edmonton Eskimos, former NCAA coach and NFL Europe coach with Rain Fire. Now Sky Sports NFL Analyst, you would have seen him doing some coverage alongside Hannah Wilkes and Phoebe Schechter. And obviously now Director of Player Development with the University of Hawaii Rainbow Warriors, where one of our very own, Freddie Pelling from the NFL Academy, is headed to pair up with you. So that's pretty cool, I have to say. But how are you, Jeff?
I'm doing really good, George. Thank you for having me on, man. This is an awesome deal.
Wicked. We're going to get straight into it because a lot of stuff has been happening recently, in particular yesterday when we look at the news with Derek Carr and the Raiders. Now, I have to say, this kind of took me by surprise because we know the Raiders had a poor start to the season. They trade for someone like Devontae Adams. They pair him up with his college quarterback, his sweetheart quarterback in Derek Carr. You then add in the likes of Darren Waller, who can be a force to be reckoned with, Hunter Renfrow, some good pieces on the defense, and now he's been benched in favor of Jarrett Stidham, who is the next man up. It kind of took me by surprise until I had to look at some of the stats and realize that Derek Carr is 11th in passing yards, which isn't awful, but he leads the league in interceptions. Now, I'm a Colts fan, and I thought Matt Ryan had that title, but it seems like it's actually Derek Carr. Not only is that, 60% passing completion percentage, bottom three in the league. What has gone wrong?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that have gone wrong, George. When it goes bad like it's gone with the Raiders, it's never just one story or one guy or one problem. They've got a number of problems with the Vegas Raiders right now. Defensively, they can't stop anybody. They've lost so many games, one-score games late, had leads at halftime, couldn't hold the lead. It's been a nightmare this year. I understand this move, I really do, because Derek's had an opportunity to show what he can do. He's had a whole season with Josh McDaniels. It hasn't gone the way the Raiders wanted it to go, certainly. And so now with 2 games left, here's an opportunity for Stidham, who's always kind of been a favorite of Josh McDaniels to their time in New England, and a chance for him to, get behind center and see if he can't give the Raiders a spark. If he does, then Carr becomes expendable. And even though he's not had a great year, everybody in the NFL is so quarterback starved. Derek Carr is going to have an opportunity to go somewhere, and he'll, again, the Raiders will be able to demand a high price for him. And that's, again, another way that they can, help build that football team, because they're not without holes. They've got a number of places where they need to improve.
Yeah, it's a strange one, but I mean, because again, once I had to look at those stats and hearing what you said now, I assume it does kind of make sense, especially when you have the likes of, and again, they've not all been that healthy. Waller hasn't been healthy for the majority of the season, nor Hunter Renfrow. So you are without your main guys, but you do have people like Jacobs, who's been rushing that rock really, really well, and Devontae Adams. But I suppose anytime you bring in a new head coach, you bring in new weapons, I guess you kind of want to see the reaction, you want to see the connection, you want to see yourself win games. And then, like you said, they haven't really gone down that way. I mean, with the Raiders, I think what's interesting to point out is they are hosting the Super Bowl next year. I say next year, 2024, in that amazing stadium. It costs so much money. And there was a lot of talk about not being able to move on from Josh McDaniels purely because of the financial aspect. And it's a lot easier for them to move on from Derek Carr. And you mentioned Jarrett Stidham, if he is able to do the job and be efficient and look after the ball, then, like you say, they can demand something for Derek Carr. And on that note, I've been thinking, I feel like Derek Carr he's going to be snapped up for sure. Like you said, there's a lot of teams out there that need quarterbacks, a lot of shuffling around going on. And one of the places that I think could be really suited to him would be the Jets. Particularly because of what's happened with Zach Wilson, who, I'm just going to be frank, I don't see him playing much more in the league, maybe being a backup. He hasn't shown too much given his opportunities. You do have Mike White there and Joe Flacco, who is probably on his way out. Where do you think you could see Carr ending up, if not the Raiders?
Well, I think certainly that you make a great point about the Jets. There's a guy that could come in there and give them some juice offensively. I think the only thing that'd be scary about the Jets to me is if you're going to play there, you're going to get hit a bunch, and they've got to get that offensive line straightened out. Carr has had, you go back in Derek's career. And really, when he broke his leg a few years ago, he was maybe playing as well as any quarterback in the league. And he's just had way too many hits. I talked to George. I talked to a friend of mine, Marty Morningwig, who has been the offensive coordinator in San Francisco with the Eagles, with the Jets, and with the Ravens. And we were talking about that very same thing in regards to Jalen Hurts. When a quarterback gets hit, those hits add up over time. And on television, it may not look like a big hit, but when you're on that field, when you're down there, and you see that those 300-pound bodies come landing on you, it doesn't take a whole lot of those before it starts to affect you as a quarterback. And David, Derek's brother, was the first player picked in the NFL draft, went to the Texans, and 5 years later, he's a career backup because he just got hit so many times. We have a term in coaching we call being hit out, and I'm not certain that Derek Carr isn't hit out. It's a fine line between standing in the pocket and all of a sudden you start feeling things, you start seeing things that aren't there. So he would have to go through that at the Jets. You look around and you see Carolina's in need of a quarterback. Obviously, the Texans, I've got to think they need an upgrade at quarterback. Seattle, I think, needs an upgrade at quarterback. It's interesting with Geno. Geno came back and did really well for a few weeks. But I made the comment at that time on my show that be careful because once the film gets out, people are going to start to remember the things that Geno couldn't do well. This has been 5 years since he's been a starter. So all of a sudden, he's got a whole group of defensive coordinators in the league that weren't in the league when he was struggling so bad with the Jets. And I think that's what has happened with him. It's caught up to him. So you look at Seattle, I said Carolina, Tampa's going to be in the market for a quarterback here real soon. Tua's health in Miami's an issue. I mean, there's a lot of places right now where you would say, hey, we got to get a quarterback in here. And there aren't very many of them. So Derek Carr would be a guy, if Stidham can show that he can do it, that would command, a price. And I think it'd be a pretty tall price. Look at what the Broncos paid for Russell Wilson. I mean, you're talking about players, draft picks, and, a $240-some million contract extension. So, if you're Denver right now, you got to really, really be concerned about your situation.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned being hit out. I played for 11 years. I played running back for 11 years over here. So I completely understand what you're talking about in terms of the hits might not look big, or when you're watching on the TV, you might not you might see a hit and think, oh, he'll pop back up. But they absolutely do add up. You are right there. There is no lie to that. It is 100% true. And before you know it, you can kind of find yourself hit out, like you say. But it's an interesting topic for sure. And some of those quarterbacks I didn't actually realize that you mentioned. Tua's health is obviously a concern. So there's going to be a lot of movement for sure. But on the topic of quarterbacks, we're going to move to the Ravens because there's another interesting debate going on here. And I think this one's going to have a lot of heat to it. The Ravens. Mm-hmm. Now, the Ravens have secured postseason football. Tyler Huntley, or Snoop Huntley, as they like to call him, is a guy in charge right now because Lamar Jackson is out with a knee injury. They're 10-5. They won against the Falcons 17-9, and they've actually outrushed opponents in 14 straight games, which is a franchise record. But it seems their entire squad, and this was the case last season too, and a lot of the AFC North hit by injuries. Lamar Jackson's, the wide receivers, the running backs, they just don't seem to be able to make anything stick. And now you come to your main man, Lamar, who didn't sign a contract, was looking for the big bag, as they call it. I think his mom is his agent or something like that, who looks after his finances. And the talk was, what happens if you get injured and you can't elevate your level of play to guarantee the money you're looking for? Lo and behold, that's exactly what's happened. His playing style almost warrants it. Now what happens with Lamar Jackson? Because there is so much talk about, does Lamar feel disrespected? Has the club done enough to try and surround him with the right weapons? Should he move elsewhere? And there was a lot of talk about this. And I, for one, personally don't know what happens, but I'll just say this. I personally feel like if he does go anywhere, it should be the Lions. But what do you think about Lamar Jackson and the Ravens?
Wow, this is really a lightning rod topic. I had a chance, George, to do their game live against the Saints. And, obviously, that was the first time I'd ever watched him play live. And it was incredible to me that when it got down to 3 minutes left to go and the game was still in doubt, they just let him take it over. And I mean, it wasn't fair because he has such transcendent talent with the ball in his hands. Now, what they had done prior to those 3 minutes was limit the hits that he took. They didn't do as much RPO stuff. There was none of the option stuff that they run, and the design quarterback runs. We got down into 3 minute when they had to, where Harbaugh had to ice the game, and the ball was in his hands every single play. And, it didn't matter whether it was Cam Jordan or whether it was Honey Badger or whoever they had assigned to him, they couldn't tackle him. I mean, it was amazing. So his value to that organization, I don't think is in question whatsoever. I think that Harbaugh and that coaching staff have designed an offense around him. Anywhere else that he goes, I'm not sure he's going to get that kind of, situation.
Yeah.
Obviously, you talk about Detroit. Detroit, I think, would be, an excellent landing spot for him because anybody that gets him, if they are willing to put themselves in a situation where they're going to design the offense to fit his skill set, then I think they're looking at an instant upgrade at the quarterback position. The challenge, as you mentioned, is that what do you do when he gets hurt? Because in this league, and it's happened almost every year now, and it's going to happen more and more as he gets a little older, because you don't get less susceptible to injury as you get older. You get more susceptible to injury. What happens when he's out? What do you go through? Now, if you say that, I think this is why I would stay in Baltimore if I was him. You look at what they've done, even the backups at Baltimore are mere imitations of Lamar Jackson.
100%.
So they've sold themselves 100% down the river on this style of offense. And, that's, I think, a rare situation in the National Football League. I think it was interesting to me when he bet on himself as he did this year, because I'll be honest with you, even though he's been hurt, nicked up, I wouldn't say hurt, he's been nicked up. I think Baltimore's been very smart in how they use him, because when they need him to be playing at his highest level is in 2 weeks when we get to the playoffs. They've won 10 football games, right?
They have.
And they haven't been pretty, a lot of them, since Lamar's been out of the game. And even the Saints game, that I watched live, it wasn't a pretty win. It wasn't like when you watch Miami and they're going on offense, they look, or you watch Kansas City or some of the other teams. They're a different way of watching football. But you recognize that they've won 10 football games. Now, that puts them in the minority in the National Football League. And I think what Harbaugh and those guys are doing is they're not going to bring him back at all until he is 100% ready to go. Yeah. And he has struggled in the playoffs. So I think having him healthy is really, really a smart move, because he is the straw that stirs that drink. There is no question about it.
Yeah, it is interesting, especially when you mention how they mirror their backups. Because, in fact, the first time I saw Snoop Huntley, I think it might have been last season when he stepped in for Lamar when he was injured. And actually, a part of me actually said to myself, am I watching Lamar? Because I was really confused. He has the same sort of body size. They move the same, elusive. And Huntley has done well. Yes, he's taken some hits, and he hasn't, like you said, it's not been pretty. But at the end of the day, with the NFL kind of standing for not for long, you just want to win as much as it's just what they say, you want to win as much as you can, because like you say, all it takes is one hit and that can be it, in the league of the NFL. But you are right. Now that you say those things, it's interesting because, as you can imagine, there's so much swirling around with regards to Lamar, where he might go, whether he stays. Are they going to provide him with more weapons? And I think they have tried to do that in certain elements. We know Mark Andrews is his go-to guy, his safety blanket. Duvernay's not been able to stay healthy. You've got Robinson, who's more of a vet wide receiver who seems to be showing up. Their running back room has been decimated, and it was the same sort of last season too. But like you say, they've won 10 games, and that is very hard to do in the NFL, let alone one game. So if they can bring him back in the playoffs and he's fully healthy and perhaps get some of their other weapons back, they've brought in Sammy Watkins, who I think had an immediate effect as well. Perhaps gives them the best shot at their playoff run and see how far they can get. But it's a very interesting topic, in particular because we've said there's a lot of QB movement going to happen this year. And if Lamar does stay, I think the Ravens will be extremely happy about that, because if not, they're going to find themselves in some hot water regardless of having Snoop Huntley as a backup. But it's an interesting point nonetheless. On to another quarterback. Oh, sorry, go on.
Let's. You bring up a good point, and I want to address it. I think it's really smart. You talked about Sammy, them bringing Sammy in. The night that I saw him play, they had just activated Deshaun Jackson, and D-Jack came in and really made an impact in the game. And you could see the one thing that he can still really do is he can really run. And what they need is a healthy Deshaun Jackson in the playoffs also, because when Lamar one of the things Lamar does well is he throws the deep ball extremely well, right? He's not as accurate in the intermediate throwing game. There are a lot of things that he doesn't, I wouldn't say doesn't do well, but they're not his strengths. His strength is obviously number one is athleticism. Number two is ability to throw the deep ball. Well, when he gets a healthy guy who can stretch the field, and all the one-on-ones they're going to get outside because of Lamar's ability to run the football. And, they even up. The only way the defense can even up the numbers in the box is they got to bring a safety down. When you bring a safety down, now you got Deshaun Jackson. And that's the way it was with Brown when Brown was there. They need that kind of guy. And I think if D-Jack's going to be healthy, he can still run. And they're going to be a force in the playoffs. You watch.
Yeah, it's funny because people at the minute can't really see it that way because of how they've limped, I'd say, into the postseason football. But we say it time and time again. You see players that show up in playoff football that weren't a factor in the regular season. You see teams show up in the playoffs that weren't so great in the regular season. So it's playing your best football when it matters is all that matters essentially. And if the Ravens can do that and have some healthy pieces, then you are right. I think they will be a force to reckon with. It's actually funny. I've got one of my friends who's a diehard Ravens fan, and I've been giving him so much stick about limping into the playoffs. I mean, I can't really talk. I'm a Colts fan, so hey. But you mentioned when he sees this, I think he's going to have the last laugh in terms of them being able to secure, they have secured playoff football and see how far they can go. But on to another quarterback, which I find another really interesting point because you mentioned the Broncos, and Lord knows they haven't got a lot going on right now. But the rise of Geno Smith. Geno Smith, 7-year backup to a Pro Bowl vote or Pro Bowl selection with Seattle Seahawks. He's essentially a vet now. He's been around for that long. He's taken a Seattle team with Pete Carroll, who everybody thought would be, were over, had nothing left because Russ isn't cooking there anymore. And instead, he now sits second in the NFC West with a 7-8 record, I believe. They took a heavy defeat this last weekend. But Geno Smith is the number one rated quarterback for highest completion percentage at 70% in the league. The number one. There's so many things that I have seen in his improvement in his game. You talk about when he was with the Jets, better arm talent, better footwork, better location of the ball. And now you have Seattle fans and Broncos fans talking about who's actually the better quarterback. Is it Russell or is it Geno? I have to say there's got to be some Pete Carroll effect to this because he is a great coach. A lot of people thought, he should ride off into the sunset and relax. But, I mean, they're building something great over here without Russell Wilson. Has he done enough for them to secure... Well, the Seahawks have the number 3 pick in the draft. Has Geno Smith done enough for them to not select a QB at that spot? Or is it just too good of a spot to turn down?
Well, George, I think the best thing Geno Smith's done all year is he had, to me, the NFL quote of the year. Because when he came back after that first game and he said, they wrote me off, he said, I didn't return the letter. And I said to myself, hey, that man is smart, man.
Yeah.
Geno's an interesting study because here is a kid that comes out of West Virginia with a tremendous amount of physical ability. I mean, he has all the arm you could ever hope for. But when you watched him at West Virginia, what you saw was that he was kind of a streaky thrower. He wasn't a particularly accurate guy. Now you're talking about a guy now 7, 8, whatever, how many years it's been later, is now leading the NFL with almost 70% completion percentage. That's a tremendous accomplishment. And to think that, he was on the scrap heap and, was destined for a career backup situation, but invested the time that he was a backup in improving his fundamentals, improving his knowledge of the game, improving his footwork, and it's shown. Now, what's interesting is what we talked about at the start of the show is he's faced a lot of defensive coordinators that have never seen Geno Smith, right? And you see this all the time in the league where a young quarterback, like Brock Purdy, for example, can come in and he makes an immediate splash. The question is, once the film starts to get around and, the analytics guys and all of the people evaluate everything, they look at everything. Yeah. And if there's something that you can't do well or struggle with or a look that hurts you or whatever, you're going to get it and get it and get it and get it again and again and again until you either show that you can handle it or it becomes a Zach Wilson thing, right? Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see down the stretch. I think it's a little early right now to say that the Seahawks are in the clear at the quarterback position because the last 3 weeks he hasn't played very well. He struggled quite a bit. Right. Yep. So, but if he can get them, if they can get to the playoffs and he can get them a couple rounds in, because it's not a great football team around him. He's got some weapons, yes. When they can run the ball, that's when they're at their best. That the kid that they have, the rookie that they have running the football, he's special dude, and he's exactly what Pete wants. But it's interesting, isn't it, George, how what Pete has wanted to do since Russell's rookie year was play defense, run the ball, and, be good enough throwing the ball to make plays. And then as Russell became more and more a focal point of that offense and Marshawn, disappeared in his career wound down, then that offense started to morph a little bit, and it really wasn't as effective, and they didn't win as much as they had previously. I think the recipe for success in Seattle remains play defense, run the football, be efficient in the throwing game, and Geno's done that for him. So I think if Geno can get through these next 2 weeks, get him into the playoffs, and maybe go a couple rounds deep in the playoffs, then you can say, okay, let's build around him because he still has a significant skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also it's a difficult one, even if he does do quite well, because sitting at the number 3 spot with the quarterbacks that are sitting out there coming up this year, it's very tempting to want to go and get those guys because there's a lot of talent this year in the QB room, and we've been saying this for the whole year because you've got guys that are waiting to be snapped up who we know can make a difference. But it's a great conversation nonetheless, just because of what he's been able to do after being a backup essentially for so long. I think Rex Ryan said something about said something about how great of an athlete and how great his arm talent was when he had him at the Jets. So it's an interesting one, but I think he has done really well for himself. And if he doesn't end up being a starting quarterback, I think he will get a job elsewhere. But we come to a point in the show where we're going to start to wind down. But before we do wrap up, I've got a couple more things for you. And the first one is, who is your Super Bowl winner this year?
Well, I think right now when you look at the teams, this is always key to me, George. And this is based on, I don't know, I've been in the playoffs 12 or 14 years. And that's actually interesting. I should go back and look at how many times we're in the playoffs. But playoff football is different, and you want to be going into playoff football, playing your best football and being as healthy as you can be. So when I look around in the league, there are some teams that obviously Kansas City is going to be a factor. There's no question about that. Buffalo is going to be a factor. There's no question about that. But two teams that I think are playing really good football right now and are beginning to get healthier by the week are the San Francisco 49ers and the Cincinnati Bengals. I think
Yeah.
if you look at those four teams, those are teams that you would say, hey, I think those should be there. But there are some other teams that I think are dangerous. I think Minnesota's dangerous. They're battle tested. They've had so many times where they've had to come back and win games late.
Tell me about it against us.
Well, Jefferson, and I mean Jefferson right now, and he's trying to make his own argument. And to me, he doesn't have to argue for it. You talk about a receiver ever being the most valuable player in the league. Well, if it's ever going to happen, this is a year where it probably could.
Yeah.
I liked Miami's chances, and then Tua goes out and he gets another concussion. So that's going to be tough. But there's some teams that are out there. The Eagles are outstanding. The Cowboys have their moments. I'm a little leery with the Cowboys because I've seen that rodeo too many times.
Yeah, exactly.
But you look at the Chargers. I mean, there's so many teams out there that if they can get hot, because let's be honest, who would have foreseen last year going into the playoffs that the Bengals were going to go all the way to the Super Bowl? Now they didn't win it, they didn't close the deal, but certainly that was a storybook. So I think it's going to be interesting. But if you pressed me right now, I think I would say the San Francisco 49ers because, they don't need their quarterback to win the game most of the time. They have got an amazing defense. And, offensively, when they're healthy, so they got the best left tackle in football. They've got running backs. They've got wideouts. And when you got a guy like Deebo Samuel that can do so many things,
yeah.
I mean, they put pressure on you in every way you can put pressure on a defense.
I think I have to. So I was with you when we come to who I thought was gonna win it, and I was hot on Miami. I was very hot on Miami until I think they lost 3 games back to back. 2 is now in concussion protocol, so there's been a bit of a drop off there. I'm also big on the Cowboys. Again, they had their moment where they took a loss to the Jags. But you're right. The San Francisco 49ers look very, very scary. And I think it's something that I've said a lot to some of my friends. As a quarterback, when you have a team with a great defense, the number 1 defense in the league, and you have so many weapons on your offense, Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, McCaffrey, Debo, who's still out injured right now, who will come back and be fully healthy, all you need to do is be serviceable, be efficient, and look after the ball. You don't need to be Patrick Mahomes. You don't need to be Josh Allen. You just need to be efficient. And so far, so good for Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant. Seems very relevant right now. So I think, if I had to pick one, I know people are going to say, what about the Eagles? I know the record speaks quite highly, but he's turned up a little bit right now. Jalen Hurts, and I don't know what it is. There's just something about it that I just can't see. I don't know why. I just can't see them going the whole way. I don't know why.
I think think about this one. They lost Lane Johnson the other day.
Yes.
Right. And Lane Johnson's probably the right, but you can argue, but him, Penei Sewell, I don't know, but he's probably one of the top 5, certainly offensive right tackles in football. And their winning percentage when Lane Johnson doesn't play is not very good. I mean, it's like I think they've lost 11 of 19 games when he's been hurt. And that's incredible that an offensive tackle can have that much of an impact in the game, but it certainly is the case. And, that's going to hurt him. I do like the Eagles. I think that Sirianni's done a great job of, building an offense like we talked about Baltimore. Yeah. That is a very Jalen Hurts-centric offense. And, we saw the other day when Minshew came in, they can still move the ball. They can still make some plays. But when you add the dynamic talents of Jalen Hurts to that offense, they really become scary. So, we'll see what Lane Johnson's loss means to the Eagles.
And last but not least, Jeff, before we let you go, people may or may not know this, but Leeds United. What is it about Leeds United that has your heart? Let the people know.
All right, I'll tell you the story. It's 1995, and I come to England for the first time with NFL Europe. And you know how it is, George, when you go into a new city, you've been traveling all day. The first thing you want to do is throw your bag on the bed, grab the clicker, and just see what's on TV. It's almost like an automatic reaction. So I click on the TV, and it's a Premiership game. And I don't know anything about soccer. I mean, I don't know anything now, but I knew less then, right? So, like, I didn't know if the ball had air or feathers in it. Couldn't even tell you. So I'm watching this game, and the game's going back and forth. And the first thing that strikes me is this one team. See, I'm a big uniform guy, right? Because I truly, like Dion says, you can't look good if you don't, you can't play good if you don't look good, right?
That's it.
And so I'm saying, I got a thing for uniforms, and like white uniforms, all white uniforms, road uniforms, they are the cleanest, man. So I'm watching this team, and they got these beautiful all white uniforms on, and I'm going, whoa, that's pretty nice. Then all of a sudden, like, I kind of watching the game out of the corner of my eye, and this one guy, the guy's dribbling the ball down the field, and this other guy comes and just freaking just knifes him, right? And you know how, like, nobody ever fights in a soccer match, but they get up and they go through all the, like
scuffle.
Yeah, on two kids on the playground, right? So, but the announcer goes, "Oh, that dirty Leeds," and I went, "That's my team." So that's why. And you know what? I got an opportunity next week to go up to Leeds. I've been past Enfield, but I've never been at the stadium for a game. Mm-hmm. So I got a call from a guy from Leeds United. I'm going to go sit in Radziani's box and watch Leeds play West Ham. And it'll be like going on pilgrimage. It's like me going to Mecca. It's like going on pilgrimage.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. That is pretty cool to get to actually go see that and sit in the box too. I think you're going to enjoy that one. And hey, Leeds aren't bad. So I'm an Arsenal fan. We just beat West Ham. So hey, you may come away with a win.
Well, we better get some points because we want to stay up. I've been too many years where we've been in the whatever the
relegation zone.
Yeah, way too many times.
Well, Jeff, that's been amazing. Thank you for coming on the show once again. It's always great to speak to someone who's so very close to the game, both on the ground and analytically as well. It helps when we talk about things for the people to understand. But thank you for coming on the show. I really thoroughly enjoyed that one. To the viewers, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you took something away from that. It's always great to catch up with someone like Jeff. And thank you for tuning in. It's Georgeonsports across all channels. But Jeff, when are we going to see you on our TV screens?
We'll be on Sunday. We've got the Packers this weekend against the Vikings, and then we get the Dolphins against the Patriots. Games, huge playoff implications for those games.
Massive games.
But let me just say, man, keep doing your thing because you're doing great work, and it's always fun to talk football with you.
Really, really appreciate that, Jeff. Thank you so much. And guys, stay tuned. We've got more guests. We sort of round out the year now, but we do have more guests lined up for next year. But I hope you enjoyed that one, and we'll see you soon.